Hello everyone, welcome to my potentially final Splatoon 2 tier list because we're probably not getting a patch. This is a slightly updated version of the last one, and as such, most of my thoughts are the same as when I went over the tier list series. So I'm going to go over things briefly, and we're going to cover subs, specials, and all the main weapons all in one video, and I'll try to keep it as slim as possible. So, let's get started. My opinion on sub-weapons has not changed very much. I moved Sprinkler up a little bit because I think its utility to paint its feet is more useful than anything Sprinkler provides by default, let alone its painting. The main thing I'm going to do with this list that you guys are going to see for all of them is I'm trying to label the tiers more. Usually they'll be unordered, but I actually made an exception for the top row of subs. I put Fizzy closer to the other ones, but I still think it is easily the best sub in the game. I just don't think it's in its own tier worth. It does everything still, but a lot of that has to do with last-ditch effort, and I think if last-ditch effort didn't exist, Fizzy might be more even with everything else. But I mean, this is pretty simple. I've talked about it a lot. I'm even going to talk about it in the video coming out tomorrow, which is bombs are just typically better than everything else. They have much more stuff to do, and the utility subs are usually very limited with a few exceptions, and even then that value is more situational. So I don't feel like there's a lot to say here. Alright, any question on sub weapons, or are we done here? Is there any... Did the overview, we're gonna move on. Told you, it's gonna be fast. Beacon, it's not useful when you're in disadvantage whatsoever. Or, not whatsoever, technically, because of the location thing, but it's more situational. It could be higher if the meta were more aggressive, but it's not. Alright, are we good on subs? I'm moving on then. 5, 4, 3... Okay, no one has questions on subs. Moving on. Specials. Let me move chat. So it's lined up. Alright, specials. Always useful for missile and armor. As long as you are able to coordinate and push with people, it's pretty simple, and it works pretty well. It's kind of hard to find a situation where these aren't useful. They're global specials. You can use them from a multitude of range distances. The main thing they require is coordination, and if you're playing in a competitive setting, coordination is something you should have by default. Insane value, but slightly situational. So these are all very good value specials, but they have some counters. Bubble Blower can be beaten by a lot of other specials, mainly stuff like Booyah or Splashdown that can destroy them, and it could be more situational because in more open areas or against the right weapons, it might struggle a bit more. Booyah Bomb is really good at dealing with other specials, but it doesn't do super well against missile and armor. So if it's against mostly those specials, then it's a bit weaker. And if we have Suction Bomb Launcher, that could be more vulnerable depending on the comps you're at. Still not really that like weak. These are still very good specials, but they have some more form of vulnerability and counterplay. Amazing value, but situational. These are specials that thrive in the right situations. Burst Rush is really good for stuffing approaches and for slowing down slower weapons and just kind of finishing them off. Inkjet is very good in Tower Rainmaker in certain maps. Stingray is very good Tower Rainmaker in certain maps. And then Splat Bomb Launcher and Inkstorm are more situational in terms of just their displacement specials. There's a lot of competition. If you want to have Splat Bomb over Suction Bomb Launcher, you're typically using it more aggressive. And if you're using Inkstorm, then you're typically trying to use it to wall out a specific area, which means it's more situational than the displacement specials above it. Basically, there are some times where these specials get more value than the specials above it, but oftentimes the other specials do better. Great value, but very niche for Stamp and Curling Rush. These are specials that are typically weak in a lot of areas, but they have things they do really well. Curling Rush has amazing paint output and walling out capability with how long it lasts, and the curling bombs being really large. So I think that gives it a lot of usefulness, and it makes it good in the right situations. However, obviously, if the map geometry doesn't favor curling bombs, or if it's not zones or Rainmaker, then it can really struggle. Stamp is a very similar thing. It does really well against objects, so stuff like breaking the Rainmaker shield, or breaking Tenebrow shield, or Splash Wall, or Booyah Bomb is really good. But outside of those specific situations, it incredibly struggles. Can get value, but drastic limitations for Baller and Ink Strike. Ink Strike. My God, I've been thinking Splatoon 3 too much. Baller and Splashdown. So Baller, its main purpose right now is to keep you alive. It can take a little bit of attention, but with how much bombs and shooters there are right now, it's really rare for Baller to get a kill or even stall as much. So this is mainly a survivability option that occasionally helps you move around. Splashdown. This is pretty much used to counter other specials or as a free ink tank refill, but it's way too situational in the form that it gets your you know, you can get shot down out of it. So it's very situational. Even if you try to use it at a safe distance, longer range weapons like Squeezer can still kill you from it. And there's not like there aren't other specials like Stamp and Booyah that counter bombs. So I think it's a combination of Splashdown being too vulnerable and Splashdown facing steep competition. It's a free reload button that paints your feet because every special in the game refills your ink tank. And to paint your feet, you have to land. And that's it. Even then, that's very selfish. And then you have to get another 2.5 second charge. Lastly, just auto launcher, limited value. It's mainly used as echolocation and slight amount of displacements, but compared to everything else, it's much more limited. Even something like Splashdown could get a lot of value in the right situation, but I think there's almost no situation in which auto rush gets a lot of value, with the one exception being popping the Rainmaker shield, and even then, every other bomb launcher besides Burst does that better, and even other specials do it better than auto launcher, like Booyah Bomb or Suction or Ultra Stamp, that can both have potential to do higher damage to it. So it's not that it doesn't do anything, but the value it gets is much less than anything else. Splashdown didn't have stronger armor, there was just latency. Like, the way lag was detected made it so they basically was invincible sometimes. Alright, anything on the specials before we get into the clusterfuck that is main weapons? So Splashdown is higher than Auto Rush? I would say so, yeah. First launcher, good sub to Chara, huh? Oh, okay, you're just saying sub isn't subscribe. Put ink armor one down. I mean, it's global, it gives you HP, it's just way too useful. The global specials are just super broken, so it's kind of hard to see them any lower. Why do you move bubble blower down a tier? Because there's been more armor and more missiles, and armor is one of the only things that can help you with bubble blower, and missiles is the only thing that can kill people in bubbles or force them to move. So because there's more armor and there's more missiles, bubbles get weaker. Sure, I love the videos. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoy it. All right. Are we good? Gonna move on. All right. I guess we can start from the bottom going up. And make chat a little smaller. Alright, so main weapons. I'm gonna say right off the bat, just before we get into the rest of this list, before people complain about their weapon being too low, the only weapons in the game I consider no reason to be used in a competitive setting are the weapons in F tier at the bottom. Those are the only ones where I think there is zero reason to be using it, because they either are directly outclassed, weak, or both. And all of these weapons are way too predictable and just have better options for any niche that they want to do. These are the only weapons I consider genuinely no reason to use it. And even then, you could argue that some of these, like YouTuber, are viable even if they're just outclassed. Same for Forge Pro. But I would say these are the weapons in the game I really consider weak to the point of not being able to win. That being said, I still consider low tier weapons bad, but unviable, that's a bit harder. The problem with a lot of these weapons is that they're way too situational, and even the niches that a lot of these weapons do have, if they're going for a more niche thing, like V-Gluga or Custom Junior, have way too harsh competition from everything else that can have that niche. And so I think they both suffer from those problems. So pretty simple for the lower tiers. I think all of these just have too many exploitable problems and not enough notable strengths to where it's worth using those problems. There's definitely going to be weapons higher up that have really exploitable problems, but these are the ones where I feel they're much less worth running. Mid tier. So, C- is suffering from comparable options again, like low tier, but these I feel technically have somewhat of a niche. For example, Dapple Nouveau is really good for a high DPS to shield with Toxic Mist. Very limited niche because there's similar weapons like that, but it's there. Something else would be something like Heavy. Like V Heavy is not that bad, but it has such harsh competition from C-Jet that you'll very rarely ever see it unless if it's from a Splatling player. But again, technically, some maps, like more graded maps, like Schellendorf, for example, or Albacore, could be argued that V-Heavy is better, but it's very limited still to where you'd want those. Drastic strengths and weaknesses are weapons that theoretically have some valuable use or a niche, such as Undercover's ability to both tank and kind of distract and play flanks, Hydra's ability to set up, L3's ability to break wall and to kind of camp areas with its aggressive special as a threat to kind of break objects, and 52's ability to output a large amount of stingrays. However, all these weapons have big problems. KL3 doesn't really have anything when it's out of control other than farming special, and even that special is one of the most predictable to approach in the game. Gal has to back up every time it wants to use its special. Hydra is super vulnerable to displacement, and Sorella Undercover's faces a lot of steep competition, and it makes it really hard for it to do anything. C plus is the largest tier in this tier list. Situational usefulness only. All of these weapons technically have spots where they would want to be used. For example, T-Tech could be good if you want an aggressive weapon with a bomb and an inkjet in your comp. But even then, there's a lot of competition, and all of these generally have better options or better kits the farther up you go. So eventually, there doesn't really become a point to use any of these, but they still have enough notable strengths to where you can want to run them in your comps, and it still would make a lot of sense. I don't think any of these weapons are really that bad. Alright. We're good for the first half before we jump to the second half of the list. This is mid through bottom tier. 170 missiles? Yeah, but you have to be really good with the main weapon. You have the no sub-weapon. And there's also just a lot of other... I don't know, missile spammability isn't really the most unique strength. Almost every missile weapon can spam it. So it makes it a bit harder to justify it. Alright, we're gonna move up. Upper tier. Yeah, we have that weird gap between that and high tier. So, B plus is your, or sorry, B minus, your potential high tier but unproven. So, this, what tier was originally just Mach 3 Bamboo, and, yeah, originally it was Mach 3 Bamboo. 1 second. Okay, so, originally, this tier was just Mach 3. Because from talking to Ollie about it, yes, I'm aware, I still don't think Mach 3 would be a top tier or anything. Like, obviously it has a very good kit, but it still has to sacrifice part of it for the gear. But yeah, you're right. It is right in the sense that the kit does have a lot of cool, unique usefulness, and there's a lot of adaptability. So I think potentially the idea of a high tier is there, and so I'm going to made this little potential tier for it. The other weapons on it are Custom Leader. I've seen a little bit of it from Shiny, and I've also seen Ice experiment with it a little bit. I still think the other kit is a lot better, but it could be argued that this could have unique niches by playing around the beacons to have more aggressive positions. But I still find out of the three in this tier list, this is the one I'm least likely to see really moving up, and more, it becomes more exploitable than anything. And Gluga Deco, it has some results by a Gluga 1 trick, but that's only in zones, and this is all modes, so it does not make it a high tier in all modes, just in zones, which is fair, but I think the weapon has really comparable options, so it's hard to see if the niche of that mid-range 2-shot will really fall into place. Good strengths, but exploitable counterplay. So, these are weapons that actually get to do some cool things, like Dooley's with its burst bomb and dodge rolls, Kensa Octobrush with the suction stamp being amazing for shredding things and fighting weapons that have less range than it, Kunder with its ability to tank and absolutely hard counter a lot of the slower weapons in the game, and then you have Grimm's ability to one-shot at a distance, burst combo, etc. However, all of these weapons have huge problems. All of them, basically, you can pick comps, and they can't play the video game anymore. So, if the opponents are willing to adapt, then the strengths these weapons have become near worthless. But if they're not willing to adapt to that, then these weapons could have unique uses at countering the right comps. And so I think they have use, and I think they're not as bad. B+, amazing niche, decent elsewhere. So these are weapons with just a dominant niche. For example, Splash with Inkjet spam, Sploosh 7 in Rainmaker with fast comps, Aerospray with Rainmaker and slow comps. Sorella 10 at its curling launcher pushing in capability with the shield, being very unique. Octobrush with its Rainmaker niche, Trinuvo with its countering niche, and both the X-Bloshers for splat sims. These are weapons that have a solidified niche, and in that niche they are relatively accepted as good. But outside of that niche, they kind of fall apart compared to other options. So that's why these weapons are here. They're great in the right situations, but outside of that, they're just decent. High tier. A minus is more drastic strength weapons, kind of similar to B tier, but unlike those, they have less exploitable weaknesses, in my opinion. For example, Kensa Jr. can still fall back on its paint and bomb poking, and its bubble combo doesn't have as hard counters even if it exists. 96 doesn't have a bomb, but it still has relatively threatening damage and paint. Basically, the disadvantage part of these weapons is not as bad as it is for these weapons, which makes them higher, on top of having the already drastic strength. Tetra is probably the one that moved up the most. Tetra and Carbon may not have as amazing kits, but the main weapons are so incredibly threatening to where I think they still are on the higher end of weapons. Tetras have the ability to kind of force engagements and just duck around. They're an insane main weapon. I don't care what Tetra players say about it. That main weapon is good. And Carbon with Burst Bomb gives it probably the only one-shot weapon in the game that can consistently, reliably threaten you with a quick kill combo through armor. And it doesn't even use that much of the ink tank. So both of these weapons have very unique strengths in it. I move Brella down a lot because I think it's just very easy to ignore Brella. I think Brella has to work super hard to get value, whereas the shooters it has to deal with don't really have to fight into it, which means even though I think Brella still wins almost all of those matchups besides Kgal, which is still an even one, I think it just has to work so much harder to do things, so where it always is playing at a disadvantage because its default value will always be lower than shooters. It has to do more in order to get better value, and that makes it too hard. Tenebrellas in other situations could be higher. The reason they're this low right now is because I find comps can deal with it really well by running multiple bombs or Kgal, for example. But if that counterplay wasn't as strong, Tent would be much higher on this list. A tier. So these are weapons that are really good, though at higher levels it can sort of fall apart as to why they're being used because they have some fatal flaw. For example, Junior doesn't have a lot of good painting range and can't fight as well as NZAP. L3D is Inkjet spam, but Inkjet can still fall apart against the right comps. H3D with its slow capabilities, Crapid with Baller and its lack of paint, Permabrush with a little bit of hard time using its kit in some situations, Bucket with the low missile output, K-Machine by having Splashdown, etc. So these are weapons that still have very good strengths and probably will work almost all the time, but they technically have some level of exploitable flaws against the right comp. And finally, in A+, we have strong, but too similar to other top tiers. So it's a bit weird to go over before the top ones, but there are weapons in top tier that are very comparable. Sometimes these are just weapons with a similar kit. For example, 89 would be K-Shot, Custom Dually Sculpture would be Vanilla Dually Sculpture, Foil Flings would be V-Jet, V-Knot would be Gold Knot, and Ray Charger would be C-Jet / Firefin. So these weapons are still really good, but there's just better options. S tier, the bottom of top tier, is all non-shooter weapons. Yep, even in top tier. We have the Armor Rapid. Very good niche. It has a lot of poking capability. Wall can help it defend itself a bit. It does struggle a bit in disadvantage, but it has better painting range compared to Rapid, and the armor is only 180 versus a 200 baller, so it's able to farm special rather reliably. It's really good for poking and playing with like burst comps, and it works really well with a bunch of shooters, so I think it has nice potential, but it does still struggle at being rushed down in disadvantage. Brush is fine. It's kind of hard to say anything about it. It's really good at getting behind people. It has a solidified niche. Nothing really does what Inkbrush does, and Inkbrush still gets value, even if less than it would in previous meta, so it's hard to deny it. Gold Knot is like a top 5 weapon in the game in Tower and Rainmaker, and it's okay elsewhere. It's really solid for shredding options. It has the best time threatening shooters at a distance, and it can push aggressively with Inkjet and still is a bomb for neutral. Squiffers, very good main weapon. Has really good range, has really good kits, paints really far away, has a threatening one-shot, can move while charging said one-shot, meaning it's nowhere near as stationary as something like a range blaster. They're just a really good main weapon. These kits are more limited in the sense that they have to be aggressive, but they're still very strong. Firefin E-Leader, these are your defensive chargers. E-Leader comes with better paint, better range, and a better kit. However, it comes with being the worst main weapon. Firefin is a lot better in terms of its mobility and its faster charge time, and it arguably has a better sub at defending itself. So I'd say Firefin and E-Leader are both pretty even, and it's much more map dependent. Tri-Slosher, very good against shooters and short-range comps, but more mid-range comps can give it trouble, which is why it's not higher. Soda, very good against shooters, but still has to do more to get value against those weapons in the sense that it has to fight and take space, which means it's harder at dealing with shooters and against more optimal shooter comps, so it'll struggle a bit more. Though still able to do plenty good. Blob Deco. The hard part about Blob is while it puts out amazing paint and walling out capability, other weapons can farm off it just to try to get their own specials. And so you have to be a little bit more careful about that, and you have to have a team that's really willing to play around Blob in order for it to do well in an all-mode setting. So it's very team dependent, it's very around playing about it. S+, really strong, some minor downsides. Custom Jet Squelcher. The downside is Ray is not that great in some maps, but that's really about it. Vanilla Dually Squelcher. Little bit of an ink efficiency problem and no pokeable bomb. Mini Splatling. Honestly, Mini doesn't really have any major exploitable weaknesses. It more just struggles to fit into comps compared to something like a K-Shot because it doesn't have a lethal bomb. That's really it. Mini's kind of an insane main weapon. Classic Squiffer. Now we have the armor variant, because this one has a fast armor charge. It can sub it for armor and kits, which brings up a ton of different options and viability. It's really interesting. Bamboo. It's Bamboo. It's your one-shot threatening weapon. It puts a lot of pressure, but it still paints well, it still moves well, it still deals with shooters well, it can still output 10 missiles. And the best weapons of the game. There's your shooters that you see all the time in Area Cup. You have Foil Squeezer for being essentially a better Nautilus with a more versatile kit. You have Vanilla Jet for the missile output and long-distance paint pressure, really good pairing with other weapons. You have K-Gal for making very annoying matchups, having the Booyah Bomb niche, and being the best weapon at holding an area. You have K-Shot for its special output, and just being a jack of all trades. You have Zap 85 for being the equivalent jack of all trades, but for armor. And finally, you have Neo Splash, which is really good at burst bombing to pair with teammates, could be aggressive if it needs, isn't that gear dependent, has bomb rush. Again, very jack of all trades weapon. That's the full list. So, yeah, a little bit of changes. I do want to end this with a bit of a preface, or like an end note, or whatever the fuck this isn't a preface, this is at the end, but yeah, weapon diversity in this game is really good. Like, this is a really, really good chart of weapon diversity. Like, everything up to, like, there are weapons in this tier that win events. In mid. There are even some weapons in low tier that have the chance to win events. And then a lot of the weapons all the way through B through A are pretty common. I guess a bit less in B, but there's still a lot of people actively playing them. There's a lot of good weapons in this game. I do agree that the top tiers are a bit insufferable, and the playstyle that is encouraged is often not great, and there's not a lot of interactivity, but I still think Splatoon has a really good balance as a whole. And as 5.5 came out and developed, I do think it improved drastically from 5.4. Like, yes, there's more shooters, but I'd argue that other weapons are still doing better. And so, I don't know, I'm kind of bittersweet with a lot of this. But it is still a tier list, which for Splatoon will always be a hard thing to do, because it's kind of impossible, especially as this game gets more balanced, it becomes even more hard to make accurate tier lists. I still find that they have more value than some people say, but to some extent, you can always nitpick a list like this and kind of change it. But, yeah. I'll take any questions about the list real quick, and then we'll move on. Why is Vunder not in F tier? I think the weapon's decent at defending itself, and you could play Splashdown to eat other specials, technically giving it a teeny tiny use. I stuck bottom tier as there is no reason in hell I would ever want to play this weapon, even if I tried to justify it. If a DVD should be in a whole other tier, well, the way comps are right now is a lot of the other top tiers are better at dealing with it, since K-Shot plus 85 is a thing, so it's easier to run things to deal with it. Forge is based? Yeah, I mean, if Forge and Goodtuber are in that tier because there's just Squeezer and Squiffer, so there's just no reason to play those weapons. Why are there so many tiers? Because that's just how this game is. It's kind of hard to simplify it. Could Forge be used to learn how to aim and bubble before using Squeezer? Absolutely. Do you think a patch could change this list at all? Here's what I think a patch could do, okay? I think if you tone down, like, say this is 200, this becomes 200, this becomes 200, and this becomes 200, and this becomes 200 to be safe. Like, say we tone down the missile options and maybe, like, slap armor on the wrist. These would still probably be the best, but the gap between these and these would be much smaller. And more importantly, it would make shooters harder to use, basically. Quad shooter would be less easy. It would be easier to run comps against it, which means people would be more likely and more willing to experiment with other comps, because quad shooter becomes harder to use. So I think a patch, it would definitely adjust this, even a minor patch. But I think it's less so the overall placings would dramatically shift. I think they would be mostly the same, but more things would get slightly closer together, and the counterplay would become easier, and so more people would be willing to experiment with counterplay than they are right now. But even then, like, for how long? 4 months? Because the new game's coming out. Bye-bye experimentation in 4 months, so, like, even then, is it really that worth it? That's probably why we aren't getting a patch. Because, I mean, I just think it's not as worth their time anymore. I think it's too late. That's why I don't think we're getting a patch. I mean, technically it'd be nice, I'll still take it, but I think the devs probably see it as, we're already so close to the third game, why put resources into this one? Like, it works, it's still somewhat balanced, that's what we want, why not just leave it and not risk ruining it when we can't adjust it anymore? I don't even think it's that bad a spot. I don't. I know a lot of people hate it, I don't think it's that bad. How biased is this? I don't know, I'm a fucking range blaster player and it's in fucking B. I hate shooters, I put them at the top. You can say I'm biased against it, but I don't know, this is just how I think. I don't rate weapons in a tier list to try to make my own weapons look good or bad. I don't give a shit about that. I'm perfectly honest about how I think with my weapons, and I'm not gonna try to label range as complete dog shit. Like, range has uses, that's why it's there. I still think it's bad, because to me, B and lower is bad. That's what I personally consider weak, is B and lower. And I think if you're trying to build a comp to win the game, there's no point in playing anything B or lower. For the most part. But even then, that's just my personal mindset. H3, it's just too fucking slow. And it's too comparable with Zap. Especially in all modes. And even then, you're gonna play off the one-shot into armor? At least it could jump and shoot. But that's about it. Yeah, I think if Grim could jump, it'd probably be in a high tier. Like, if Grim had the ability to jump, it'd probably be up here. Like, honestly, probably A- would be the tier I'd put it in, because I think it fits with that. Like, its strength would go from good to drastic. But its counters would still be more exploitable than anything here, even if it could jump. Where's Crappin? Right here. So it's like, the ability to jump would help a lot, because it would make its weaknesses slightly less bad, and it would make its strengths better, but it would still be very exploitable. It would just be arguably more worth it, because you could take advantage of the one-shot more often, without having to stand still, which would help it out a lot. But, I mean, realistically, I think what range needs to be, like, good regardless of the comp it's fighting, is for armor to not exist. Yeah, I mean, I could see it eventually, but I feel like it's just too hard to... I feel like it just has to do too much. Custom Hydra S+? I don't think so. I think it's just way too exploitable. Like, quad shooter comp will just shit on Hydra so hard. Like, the quad shooter team would have to, like, throw. Or there'd have to be, like, a major skill difference, in my opinion. Yeah, I'm hoping that labeling tiers like this makes it a bit more clear. The whole reason I'm kind of experimenting with this in the first place, like, I kind of wanted to redo this a bit, but not really, which is why there's just going to be a second channel video. But the main reason I'm doing this is to kind of test, like, labeling tiers like this, because I think this is a much better way to go about it for Splatoon. Because it's like, what the fuck does top tier mean? Like, I want to define it more. How do you convince someone? I don't know. You could make an argument. You can't convince them. That's up to them. Why is V Flingza not higher? Splat Bomb Rush isn't like the most valuable special, and there's better Splat Bomb Rush options, so I don't see much of a reason to play it. It also just lacks a good sub for the weapon. Yeah, exactly. Like, people are going to disagree with me. Even other top players are going to disagree on specifics. But my goal is to make a list that I think would be somewhat understandable as to where I'm coming from. So, yeah, I mean, what I'm going to do with this video, this will be added to my tier list playlist, but this is going to be uploaded to the second channel. This is not going to... I don't feel the need to make this a full main channel video, so I'm just going to keep it there. Why is V Machine on next tier? You know why. You can figure it out. Alright. With that being said, though, I think we're going to wrap it up here. So, thanks for watching if you're on the second channel. Bye.